I never thought I'd be writing this. I feel like I need to tell someone what's happened. Jake and I had been together for 3 years when we started talking about getting engaged. We both loved antiques. You know, items with history and stories embedded in them. Every weekend, we'd hunt together through antique shops and estate sales, searching for all sorts of forgotten treasures. That's how we found the ring. The perfect ring. At least that's how it felt then. It sat in a locked case at Madame Aloise's shop downtown, a deep blue sapphire set in an intricate gold band with delicate filigree. Art Deco. Unique. Perfect. I knew it immediately. Jake, ever the romantic, insisted on buying it then and there. He shooed me from the store, promising to make it special. 2 weeks later, on a warm evening, he led me to our favorite park bench beneath the willow tree we always loved. He knelt, eyes bright with excitement, and presented a small velvet box. I knew what was inside before he even opened it, but when my eyes finally fell on the ring itself, my heart stuttered and I seemed to forget everything I knew. My mind went blank. "Where did you get this?" I asked, fingers hovering over the gold band. Jake grinned. "You know where." And I did know, of course. My brain was just temporarily mush. I guess it was the ring from Madame Aloise's shop. But inside the band, something new gleamed under the lamplight, an engraving. L.N. C. I ran my thumb over the initials. Lucy M. And Jake C. Jake shrugged. It was already there. Fate, right? The night air seemed to press around us. Something cold curled in my stomach. "What are the odds?" I whispered. "I'm not a statistician." Jake laughed. "But I think it was meant to be." We drank champagne under the willow, and I fell asleep that night with the ring on my finger, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. Then the nightmares started. I dreamed of a bride in a blood-spattered church, sobbing behind her veil. When she turned to face me, her face was bruised and tear-streaked. I woke gasping for air, my chest feeling like it was about to explode. "Bad dream?" Jake mumbled, pulling me closer. "Just nerves." I lied, glancing at the sapphire gleaming in the darkness. The next morning, things got so much worse. My neighbor waved as I collected the mail. The sapphire caught the sunlight, flashing blue for just a second. 5 minutes later, her brakes failed as she backed out of her driveway. Her car plowed into an oncoming delivery truck. I watched paramedics pull her mangled body from the wreckage. I tried to convince myself it was a horrible coincidence, 1 in a billion or something. But then my boss dropped dead during a meeting later that afternoon, just moments after complimenting my ring. "An aneurysm," they said. I saw how his eyes fixed on the sapphire right before blood trickled from his ears. Deep down, I knew I had been cursed by the ring I loved so much. I had become a walking omen of death. On my way home that night, still in shock, I witnessed a man glance at me, then climb up to the ledge of my apartment building and jump without hesitation. The thud his body made when it hit the pavement will haunt me forever. His dead eyes found mine in the crowd. I clutched my hand to my chest, and the sapphire felt warm against my skin. Too warm. When I looked down, I noticed a faint burn mark on my skin. Around midnight, I decided it was time to remove the ring. But my finger had swollen. The band wouldn't budge at all. No amount of soap, ice, or oil could loosen it. As the days continued, so did the deaths. Abar used to touch my hand while returning change. Minutes later, he choked to death on a scone as I waited for my cold brew. An elderly woman who admired my ring at the grocery store was crushed beneath collapsing shelves moments later. At dinner with friends, I kept my hands hidden under the table, but Melissa insisted on seeing the ring. The moment the sapphire caught the light, a waiter carrying cherries jubilantly tripped. The dessert's high-proof alcohol splashed across nearby tables, igniting instantly. The entire restaurant went up in flames. In the chaos, I watched Melissa's hair ignite, her screams swallowed by the roaring inferno. Only Jake and I walked out unscathed. After 8 deaths in a week, I was desperate. I started keeping my left hand hidden whenever I was out in public, stuffing it deep into my pants or coat pockets. I also began Googling the ring online. It was such a luxurious and unique ring. I was curious if it had a history. It didn't take long to find the original owners, Lydia M. and James C. L. and J. See, just like our initials. A newspaper article from 1952 was brief but chilling. Local bride found slain on wedding night. The accompanying photo showed Lydia wearing my ring, and she looked just like the woman in my dreams. Something else disturbed me, too. Jake had changed. His once warm brown eyes now seemed glassy and unfamiliar. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at the ring with an expression I didn't recognize, possessive, hungry. When I mentioned the deaths, he shrugged them off as coincidences. When I suggested we research the ring's history together, he changed the subject. I began to research alone, visiting libraries and local historical societies. I found more articles about Lydia and James. They'd been high school sweethearts. James had given Lydia the sapphire ring as a symbol of his and I love, a family heirloom passed down through generations. But on their wedding night, something had gone terribly wrong. The police found Lydia's body in their honeymoon suite, strangled. James was nowhere to be found. For weeks, the papers speculated about his whereabouts. Had he killed his bride and fled? Had they both been victims of a robbery gone wrong? 6 months later, James's body washed up on a riverbank 50 miles downstream from the bridge, where his car had been found abandoned. His death was ruled a suicide. In my search, I discovered an old woman who claimed to be Lydia's cousin. She lived in a nursing home on the outskirts of town. When I visited her, she recognized the ring immediately. "You need to get rid of it," she whispered, her papery hand clutching mine. It was cursed by James's great-grandmother, a woman scorned. She wanted revenge on the family that had rejected her, so she placed a curse on the ring. It brings death to anyone who sees it, except for the wearer and their beloved. She leaned closer. "But there's a price for that protection." "What price?" I asked. "I think your souls," she said. "I can't be certain. I only know James wasn't himself after he gave Lydia that ring. It changed both of them over time. The night he killed her, his eyes were different. I had seen them myself. Empty, like you were staring through a window. Like Jake's eyes now. The old woman told me how to remove the ring. It had to be done on a new moon. There was a mixture I needed to prepare, herbs and oils, and other things I won't mention here. The process would be painful, but it was the only way. The next new moon, I prepared everything as I was told." Jake watched with those unfamiliar, glassy eyes as I submerged my hand in the mixture. The pain was excruciating, my skin blistered on contact, but it worked. The ring loosened. With one final, agonizing pull, I wrenched the ring free. My finger came with it, severed cleanly at the knuckle. Blood poured from the wound, but I felt only relief as the sapphire glowed with rage. Jake lunged for the ring, and I was faster. I dropped it into a cloth bag and tied it with red thread 7 times, exactly as instructed. We drove to the old bridge at the edge of town. The bag seemed to get heavier with each mile, and I could swear I heard scratching coming from inside it. At the center of the bridge, we stood in darkness, staring at the black water below. No moon reflected on its surface. "Are you sure?" Jake asked, his voice finally his own again. I nodded, clutching my bandaged hand. "It has to end." He held the bag over the railing. For moments, it seemed like he couldn't let go, like the bag was stuck to his hand. Then, with visible effort, Jake opened his fingers. The splash below was small. The ripples disappeared quickly. "It's been 3 weeks. No accidents. No deaths. Jake is himself again, though he remembers everything. We both do." When Jake and I drive over that bridge, we both fall silent, staring at the water below. Sometimes I dream of the river bottom, of silt slowly covering the cloth bag, of water flowing endlessly over hidden things. In these dreams, I see fish swimming near the bag, then darting away suddenly. The ring is down there, waiting. Is it truly contained, or simply biding its time? When I wake from these dreams, my missing finger throbs with phantom pain, and I wonder if somewhere in the darkness of the river, a sapphire pulses in answer. The man walked in Atua, dragging something black behind him. The way it moved didn't sit right. Neither did he. The receptionists felt it immediately. It was the way he walked, stiff and uneven, like a scarecrow with one leg shorter than the other. He had greasy blonde hair beneath a 10-gallon hat, spurs clicking as he moved. I watched the security footage later. His lips were white and thin, his teeth crooked, his mouth twisted into a half smile. like he was seconds from laughter. He was dragging a massive black Rottweiler. The dog resisted, back paws sliding across the floor. The camera didn't pick up sound. Later, a 2-hour suction told me what he said. He's acting possessed. I handed him intake forms. He hobbled back to a bench. I watched through the camera lens as another client holding a cat carrier slid away from him. I looked up his paperwork. The address led to some warehouse out in the scrublands. 3 states away. The name seemed fake too. Keaton. No records. No online presence. It didn't seem to fit him. But the dog's name? Mutt. That was the only detail I believed. You might wonder why I checked. It's not standard protocol. I don't usually do this. But the events of the last few nights led me to my search. When he handed the paperwork back, he sat down again, dragging the dog with him like a sack of flour. He leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes fixed ahead. He moved, like a corpse propped upright. His dog didn't move much either. It sat there, waiting. We see a lot of characters here, some aggressive, some kind. But this man, something about him was wrong in a way I can't articulate. I stepped into the lobby to bring him into an exam room. It took him a second to register me, like he was in a trance. And then the smell hit me. Stale cigarettes, gas fumes, and beneath that, something worse. A rotten, greasy stench that clung to the air. The dog sat still, vacant, a husk. It was like someone had lobotomized it. As it stood there, drool began dripping from its mouth, pooling on the floor. I introduced myself and got to work. So, what's going on with Mutt today? Keaton didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the ceiling, like he was staring at something that fluttered in the air above us. Oh, he ain't acting right. He ain't been eating much. This is usually where clients start trembling. Some could go on for hours if you let them. He had decided he'd given me enough information. He sat staring at the ceiling through those dirty locks of hair. When I knelt to take the dog's heart rate, the second my fingers touched its skin, a wrongness crawled into me. That tingle before lightning strikes. That creeping dread when something awful is about to happen. The vitals were normal. The heart rate, breathing. But its skin was cold. And its temperature was 97 degrees. Lower than we like. I checked its skin, seeing how dehydrated it was. When I peeled back its loose slits to check its gums, I felt a jolt of unease. Like I was too close to something I shouldn't be. The gums were pale. The pupils locked onto me. Dilated. That feeling of unease was sickening. Don't turn your back on him, the man said. I paused. Mid-turn. Excuse me? If you're gonna walk from him, do it fucking. Otherwise, something bad might happen. I exhaled. Irritated. He'd watched me get close to the dog. Lean in. Take its temperature. Listen to its heart rate. Yet now was the time he decided to warn me it was aggressive. I liked this situation less and less. The man. The dog. The way this whole situation ate at my gut. I backed away, facing the dog. He watched me like I was prey. Like I was meat. A few moments later, our on-site emergency veterinarian, Dr. H. Arkham, came in. Old school. No nonsense. He and Keaton exchanged few words. The vet recommended blood work and an overnight stay with an IV fluid drip. The dog needed warming up too. Keaton never lost that dumb smile, that half-cocked grin, like something was hilarious. But he nodded, accepted the treatment plan. We went to take the dog into the back treatment area. I slipped a muzzle on, of course, and that's when I noticed how the dog refused to walk. The owner had dragged it behind him earlier, but now, it wasn't acting lethargic. I could see in its eyes. It was choosing not to move. It was being obstinate. I had a larger male staff member, Ryan, carry the dog for me. As he picked it up, he glanced at me. We didn't exchange words, and I knew he felt it too. Not only the dog. The air itself seemed to hum with an unearthly feeling. When we went to draw blood from its jugular, it didn't even react. We inhaled the dog steady, hands firm on either side of its head, jaws up. The needle slipped in. The syringe filled. The blood felt lukewarm. It didn't feel like it had just been pumping through a live body. I ran it through the machines, and it confirmed mild dehydration, with some elevatedly PASI values indicating mild pancreatitis. We placed it in a heated kennel, tucked it under blankets, and hooked up the IV catheter. Keaton was gone. The relief was fleeting. Mud remained, and with him came something unseen, a presence thick as fog, pressing in from all sides. That was 3 days ago. That night was quiet, there for an emergency hospital. We had another dog kennel lead to spaces down from the Rottweiler. It was a cattle dog that had undergone emergency laparotomy. It had been doing fine. Normal vitals. Good appetite. Responsive. 2 hours later, I crossed into the back animal ward to check on it. The cattle dog was dead. It had torn open its own incision. The comb lay discarded. It hadn't just licked or nibbled, it had utterly and completely dismantled itself. Even when coils of intestine unfurled from its abdomen, it kept biting at those guts. The dog had attacked his own innards as if they were coiled vipers waiting to lunge. The dog was in a wet slump, head limp against the floor. The blood ran in bright ribbons, swelling toward the kennel drain behind him. I heard the gentle slurp of the blood sucking down the drain. The kennel was a bloodbath. It streaked the walls, spattered the ceiling. His intestines had leaked a mixture of bile and digested sludge. The cattle dog's eyes were vacant orbs, glistening in the light. I stood still for a moment, taking in the horror, the scope of this violence. At 2 kennels down, said Mutt. I focused on my task. No expression on his stoic face. Fluid drip running. Heater humming. There was only the sound of the blood in the pipes. Mutt didn't pants. He didn't whine. His eyes reflected the fluorescent light, and for one sickening second, they looked almost human. Drive HR made the call, and I heard every word, every choked sob through the thin walls of our office. The owner didn't cry. They wailed. I'd seen plenty of death in this job, but this was different. This wasn't bad luck. Something else had its hands in this. The mood in the hospital shifted palpably. In all my years, I'd never seen a dog unzip itself like a gin bag, spill out its intestines. His eyes followed every movement. The bloody towels, the mop buckets, the cattle dog-sized body bag, zip-tied and labeled. That night was quiet, but it didn't feel like a break. I imagine I was in a field staring at thunderheads from like warships in the distant sky. That feeling was the promise of something worse to come. At some points, hours after the cattle dog's death, I heard the steady beeping of a monitor from the kennel ward. It was the IV pump hooked up to Mutt. I didn't want to go over there, but I did. I brought Ryan. We slipped the muzzle over Mutt's head. He didn't resist, didn't flinch. He let it happen. His eyes followed the movement of our hands as we buckled it behind his head. Only his eyes moved. 2 dark orbs. He was digesting the scene around him. It felt like he was learning and listening. The dog had kinked the IV line beneath its paw. We moved it aside, smoothed it out. That should have been it. A simple fix. But as we turned to leave, the light above his kennel flickered. At first, we saw a slight flicker. It was barely noticeable. And it sputtered, dimmed, and cut out completely. The kennel dropped into shadow. Ryan and I froze. The only light now was a faint glow from the hallway behind us. We exchanged a glance. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us wanted to acknowledge what we were feeling. The air in the room changed. Heavy, buzzing, like the static before a storm. Then the two tube lights above Mutt's kennel flared so bright it hurt to look at them. A pop, then a sizzle, and they died. Everything was silent. Ryan's back was to Mutt. Mutt lunged. It was a surge of violence. Even with the muzzle strapped tight, a blur of black as Mutt's body lunged forward. The muzzled face rammed against Ryan's side, smashing into him again and again. Jan screamed. The dog was silent, except for the mechanical snapping of his jaws, working beneath the muzzle, spittle flying. Ryan whistled, trying to stand, but the sudden attack had taken him off guard. I reacted without thinking, threw open the kennel door. Mutt rammed into Ryan again, harder this time. The sheer force knocked him off balance. Ryan writhed around to grab at Mutt. The moment he faced Mutt, the dog stilled. It stood there motionless, bathed in the new darkness. Something was wrong with this dog. Not neurologically. It was something so much deeper. I sensed the calculating intelligence of a predator, but it felt much more malignant than that, like a cancerous tumor spreading quietly beneath the surface of your skin. Mien and I trembled, shaken to the core. Later, He revealed a bruise under his ribs, a deep bloom of violet spreading like a rose beneath his skin. Neither of us spoke about it. The rest of the night passed without incidents. I focused on my other cases for the night. I worked with a Chihuahua hacking through pneumonia, a Persian cat with seizures, and a tabby cat with proprius patient tissues in its forelimbs. I went through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere. Rian seemed dazed, like something fresh had broken inside of him. It wasn't the shock, more the trauma, or the fear. It was more profound than that. I left for the night still unsettled. Ryan didn't even wave goodbye when I passed by. I chain-smoked cigarettes in my car before driving home, flicked the butts out the window and watched them sail onto the asphalt. My hands were shaking the entire ride, and when I finally collapsed into bed, I pulled my pistol out of my purse and slipped it under my pillow. And as the sun crept over the horizon, my dreams were wrong. I dreamed of a black face snarling in the dark, leaning in, sniffing, as like hollow pits, endless swirling galaxies within. I felt the far-away sting of teeth sinking into my flesh, not a bite, not an attack, but a slow, deliberate pressure, easing into my skin. When I woke, my sheets were damp with sweat. When I came in for my shift that night, I felt a deep sense of disappointment the second I walked past Mutt's kennel. He was still there, heater purring, eyes following. The lights above his kennel were still blown out. The ones beside them had started to flicker. Rian called out sick, said he'd been throwing up since the night before. I had a feeling there was more to the story, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I shot him a text wishing him well. He read it, yet he didn't reply. And that sinister, eerie man who called himself Keaton? His phone went straight to dial tone when we tried calling for a case update. He wasn't coming back. He'd paid half his bill upfront in crisp, old $100 bills. We weren't getting the other half. The night was busier. I told my manager we shouldn't put any other dogs in that ward, but we didn't have a choice. Our small animal ward was on the other side of the building, but for the larger dogs, they had to go there. He admitted a Great Dane with liver disease. There was nowhere else to put him, so I placed him in the kennel farthest from Mutt, 2 down from the cattle dog that had ripped itself apart. When I went back to check on them 10 minutes later, I stopped cold. Mutt's kennel was wide open. The latch wasn't done. The door swung open. He wasn't on fluids anymore. Someone must have taken him off. There was no beeping fluid pump, and there was no sign of how the door had opened by itself. This part of the facility was desolate this time of night. Mutt was sitting right at the threshold, slack-jawed and unblinking. I shut the kennel, latched it, and then I left the room. I returned with 2 plates of food. Immediately, I felt nauseous. The kennel was wide open again. I hadn't heard a sound, hadn't seen the door move. The only way to unlock these kennels is with hands, with the possible thumbs. I was certain no one had been back here while I grabbed the cans of food. I slammed it shut again, this time locking it with a makeshift carabine clip. I slid 1 plate of food under each kennel. I gave low-fed wet food for the Dane, and critical care wet food for Mutt. I was walking away when I heard it, a sound that froze me. Not a growl, not a whine. It sounded like someone trying to speak while gargling a mouthful in water, like a deep, male voice gargling on words before spitting them out. It was the sound of a dog trying to talk. I turned. Mutt sat there, silent now. Something tingled in the air, a musical conductor guiding along an orchestra, because to my right, the Dane had begun to cry. The Dane was the one making these ungodly noises. The Dane's plate of food lay spilled across the kennel floor. His hackles folded back. The Dane backpedaled until its body pressed against the far wall. I watched the Dane's gaze flicker up toward the ceiling. It became immediately apparent to me that the dog was feeling something, a deeply instinctual and inexplicable something. I knew it was feeling that way, because I felt it too. When I reached for the kennel door, the crying stopped. The Dane's body trembled. Then his whimpering changed. It deepened into a low, eerie sound, like a tornado siren, changing in pitch and tone, high to low. Without warning, it stopped altogether. The dog went still, to still, gathering itself back to a normal pose. Then, all at once, the Dane began attacking his own leg. Not chewing, not licking, breaking. These were deep, pulverizing bites. Bone audibly cracked in the echo of the cavernous hallway. Blood spattered the kennel floor. It wasn't a dog in pain. It wasn't a dog in distress. It was something else. This dog was destroying itself with purpose. I couldn't go in there. If I did, he'd likely redirect this aggression onto me. He would send me to the hospital if I tried to intervene. I turned and ran, shouting for help as I sprinted through the clinic. Dr. Mint to other techs. Angie and Denise came rushing out of an exam room, the hallway filling with the sound of my frantic screaming. I grabbed a rabies cat couple and beat them back to the kennels. The Dane was still biting, not a rabid and frothing frenzy, and instead an oddly calm and intentional one. The flesh of its leg hung in shredded tatters, tend aim a suggestion of bone beneath. Blood spurted like pulsing shots from a water gun in rhythm with its heartbeats. I slipped open the kennel door and looped the cat couple around its neck, tightening it hard, and a wrenching movement on enough to stop it from lunging at its own body. It snapped at the air, frantic, without even a hint of pain or emotion behind it. Then it latched onto the metal pole, not out of panic, not out of rage, out of a bizarre eruption of instinct. The sound was unbearable teeth breaking against metal, splintering, shattering. The flesh of its leg was gone, a ragged mess of meat exposed to the air that flapped as it chewed at the metal. I saw part of a fractured canine fall out of its mouth. The cat couple was bloody, dented, and holding firm, withstanding each powerful bite directed at it. The dog was weakening by the time drive. Charkham arrived, slumping over in the drenched puddle of its own blood. By the time we managed to inject the sedative, it was too late. The blood loss was too severe. The Dane collapsed to the floor, body twitching, biting at the air. It wound down like a toy with dying batteries, its eyes glazing over before going limp. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw mud, lips pulled back in a snarl. When is that fucking dog going to leave? I snapped, pointing at him. Charkham shot me a sharp look. Blood streaked his white coat. His eyes were dark, hollowed with an exhaustion brought on long before mud entered our lives. Something is wrong with it, I insisted. All I see is a dog who mutilated itself in our care and then bled out. Mind you, this is the second one in 2 days. Don't worry about that fucking dog. He gestured at Mud emphatically. We have bigger issues here. I have another owner to call. Another person I have to tell their pet killed itself. Under my watch. God, this is a mess. He flicked blood from his fingers, dragged his sleeve across his face. He was years past burnout, a shell of his former self. He couldn't see what I saw. He couldn't see the way Mutt watched, the way his eyes lingered over the carnage pooling beneath my feet, like he was enjoying it. Drive Charkham sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. We tried calling that creepy bastard again. Numbers out of service. He ditched the dog on us. That meant we had to rehome it. It could take weeks. I couldn't take weeks with him. None of us could. And as I looked into Ganji's eyes, I knew she felt the same. And over the next few hours the hospital settled into an uneasy silence. The night shift pressed on, but something had shifted. We were all exhausted, hollowed out by what we'd seen. The cattle dog, the Great Dane, the blood, the 2 blood-drenched kennels we'd had to clean up. Mutt still sat in his kennel, untouched food sitting at his feet. A heater hummed in background. 2 more lights flickered out while I cleaned. I mopped blood from the floors, the thick iron scent clinging to my skin. The mess soaking the towels we used was a deep, ugly red. And through it all, Mutt never looked away from us, his shadow looming in the dark part of this corridor. I told myself I'd figure something out, that I needed time. But time wasn't on my side. I was dumping a load of bloody towels into the laundry bin when I heard it. All Aishnazan. I dropped everything. A voice, thick and wet, slurred in a way no dog's throat was built to produce. It wasn't a bark. It wasn't a growl. It was trying to speak. And what came out wasn't a sound. It was a name. My name. Allison. I turned, stomach lurching. Mo was sitting in his kennel, still, muzzle slack, drool pooling on the blanket beneath him. His pupils seemed to swallow all the remaining light. I couldn't move. My brain was trying to rationalize it, trying to shove what I had heard into a box of normalcy. Maybe I'd misheard it. Maybe it was the pipes, or a monitor, and the stench of rot hit my nose like a sniff of smelling salts. It was not the usual smell of the hospital, not the faint antiseptic an animal must that always clung to the air. This was meat left in the sink for weeks. This was something dead wedged into the unseen cracks of the world. It was a volatile and overpowering scent consuming anything else in the room. And I realized then that the smell I'd caught when Keaton first walked into the lobby, that greasy, putrid stench, it hadn't been him. It had been mud all along. I felt a desire deep in my core to run. And so I did. I scooped up the blankets off the floor, shoved them into the laundry bin, and bolted. My hands shook as I crammed the lid shut. My pulse was a hammer in my ears. Don't turn your back on it. The memory of Keaton's words crawled down my spine like a cold hand. He's acting possessed. I knew what Bud had tried to do to Ryan. I knew what he wanted to do to me. And now I knew. I wasn't waiting for him to act. I was going to kill him. I kept my head down the rest of the shift, biding my time. My mind wasn't on the cases I took. I worked on autopilot. I went through the motions, but my body was moving without me. And when I got a moment alone, I pulled up 20 ml of pentabraceable sodium and phenytoin sodium solution. It's a medication called the UAHA. In other words, it's that sparkling pink liquid we in the veterinary field use to put animals down. I drew up enough of this stuff to kill a dog twice much size. There'd be a discrepancy in the controlled substance log, but I could smooth it out over the next few weeks. A couple of slightly higher doses given on euthanasia cases. If I logged these with enough time between them, I was confident no one would notice. I locked the cabinet, slid the syringe into my pants pocket. By doing this, I was committing a crime. Breaking DI laws. I could lose my license, my career, even end up in jail. But deep in my bones, I knew one thing for certain. That thing in the kennel, whatever it was, it needed to die. The next morning, when I arrived for my shift, the hospital was heavy with grief. Everyone was crying, because it turned out, Yain was dead. He'd taken his own life in his trailer sometime after leaving work. No details. No explanation. He was there one day, and he was gone the next. The police had come by to inform us. They didn't stay long. Didn't need to. I knew then. Yain's death cemented what I had to do in my mind. I couldn't wait until another dog was placed in those kennels. Until another staff member was pushed over the edge. So I worked through the grief. Through the horror. Pushing it all into a place I'd deal with later. I waited for the right moment. A wall between shift changes. The staffing was light. I approached Mutt's kennel. He cocked his head, his eyes tracking my movements. He looked almost expectant. I opened the kennel door and slid the muzzle over his face. My hands moved with a sharpness I hadn't felt before. I yanked the straps to tight, a bit of malice in my actions. My pulse was steady. I held Mutt's paw, feeling for the vein, my other hand already slipping the needle beneath the skin. The syringe in my palm felt hot. I pushed the plunger, forcing the thick, pink liquid into his vein. It was a heavy dose, too much for even the largest dog, and I pushed every last drop. Normally, euthanasia is instant. A body slumps, the muscles relax, and life fades like a deep exhale. Their eyes stay open, but they flood with vacancy. Mutt didn't move. His chest still rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. His muscles remained locked, rigid. His pupils, wide and black, never left mine. This dose should have ended him. This dog should be dead. The hallway lights flickered. One by one, the bulbs sizzled out, plunging the kennel ward into a profound darkness. The air thickened, heavy with the weight of something unseen. The heater shuddered to a stop. The only glow now came from the exit sign at the far end of the hall, casting a weak green wash over the kennels. The shadows seemed to twist and dance around me. I felt adhered to the spot, unable to move. The door to the kennel slammed shut behind me. My breath hitched. The silence was absolute now, only interspersed with the slow, wet rasp of Mutt's breathing. I could feel him in the dark, the weight of his presence gnawing at the air. Low-lyishness. The voice came from before me, deep into the churning pool of shadows further back into the kennel. A sound like vocal cords caught like strings and hidden beneath a mound of scarred tissue. A broken, misshapen mouth trying to shape words. The vowels stretched, dripping with something slick and inhuman. My stomach lurched. I reached for the latch, fingers fumbling, but my hands were slick with sweat. My breathing was too loud. The darkness pressed in. The rot smell thickened, crawling up my throat. and I felt it. A cold, dead hand closed around my ankle. I choked on a scream. My body jolted as something gripped me. Those jagged fingernails pressed against the fabric of my scrub pants. The air rippled in an electric wash. The sensation of static snapped against my skin. I turned in a single heaving motion and I ran. The door gave way beneath my shoulder, and I burst into the hallway, feet pounding against the tile. Behind me, I heard the kennel door smash open. The sound of paws, heavy and fast, hitting the ground. He was coming. I sprinted blindly through the dark, running my fingers along the wall as I searched for the end of the hallway. When I reached it, my fingers scraped against the smooth wood. For a time, completely unable to find a knob, a latch, my fingers graced only an endless surface. Paws pounded closer behind me. I swear I heard more than one set of them. It almost sounded like a quiet herd. There was no growling, no snarling, no warning, just the rush of movement in the dark. A silent freight train, barreling toward me. So I spun, pressing my back against the door. The darkness beyond was absolute, thick and suffocating. The emergency exit sign glowed faint above me, swallowing the building in a weak neon glow. I saw the faint outline of a hunched beast. A panther crouched behind brush seeking out its prey. Breathing filled the void, slow, wet and thick with. Then, a whisper of movement, so close I felt the aura shift around my face. I turned and bolted down the hall. Instinct drove me forwards. Without thought or plan, my body simply moved on its own accord. I reached my locker, yanked it open, hands scrambling for my purse. The air shifted. I weight pressed close. I felt it before I saw it. A swirling black hole, yawning open behind me. My fingers closed around cold metal. The grip of my handgun. I turned and I raised the barrel towards the faint figure I could make out in the darkness. And I fired. The first shot lit up the hall like a camera flash. In that brief flicker, I saw him that snarling grin. The second shot. A third. His body jerked, but he didn't fall. My ears buzzed with each concussive shot. In the green shimmer of another exit sign, I saw that his lips were still curled back in that awful rictus. The sixth and final shot hit its mark. The left side of his skull caved inward, the muzzle of his face blown apart where the bullet had exited. Even in the thin light I saw how his jaw sagged open, how that tongue flopped out limp, and even as he fell, his head twitched. A violence, a natural snap of movements. A thick, wet pop echoed. He swayed. Then, finally, he collapsed in a heap all at once. I stood there, gun trembling in my hands. It was ringing. The darkness still pulsed around me, thick and heavy, pressing in from all sides. Then, footsteps, shouts, voices. Someone grabbed my arm, yanking me back. The lights flickered, buzzed, then flared back to life. And for the first time, I saw what I had done. One shot had buried itself in the tile. The rest had hit him. Mud lay on his side, his head a ruin of blood and bone. His chest rose once, twice. Then he went still. The bite muzzle was missing. He must have pulled it off somewhere during the chase. I didn't move. The hospital swarmed with police. I don't know who called them or when, but they arrived fast. A slew of questions. I registered almost nothing in my haze. They took me into the back office, my hands still shaking, my ears still filled with phantom echoes. I knew exactly what I had to say. I knew how to frame it. Self-defense. My Uncle Philip was a defense attorney. He talked shop often with me on our fishing trip outings, so I knew a little more than I let on, and I managed to play my part well. And so, the police let me go. We wrapped, bagged, and stuffed mud in the freezer, awaiting cremation, and I took time off work, spent a few days in silence, trying to erase the memory of that voice, tried to ignore that palpable sound of my name in some twisted, malformed mouth. As you likely imagined, it didn't work. The phone rang on the morning of my scheduled return to work. It was a blocked number. Part of me knew the call was coming, as irrational as that sounds, and so I answered. Slow, shaky breathing filled the line. Then he began to laugh. Like everything that had happened to me was a hilarious joke. Low, drawling, thick with something I couldn't name. Maybe it was a mouthful of tobacco chew. You shouldn't have killed it. Little lady. Keaton. His voice slithered through the speaker, curling like a snake around my spine. His laughter built, rising, filling the silence. You've gone and made things so much worse. And as the laughing turned into hollering, the line clicked dead. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, staring up at nothing, his words weighing down the air. Gone and made things so much worse. My first thought was confusion. How did he get my number? My second thought was frantic. Those words struck a chord deep inside my marrow. He said I'd made things worse, and for some reason, deep in the pit of my soul, I believed him.